Hey guys, something I wanted to talk about today is, well, I was in the military, obviously, if you guys didn't know. I'm in the Marine Corps. Now, I'm a reservist now, but when I was active duty, one thing that we weren't allowed to do was talk politics. Now, the reason is very obvious, is that, well, the DOJ uh, and the Department of Defense and the Department of the Navy are not supposed to have any political views whatsoever. They don't endorse any candidates. After all, the government shouldn't be pushing for one candidate or the other. Now, people in the DOJ, I said DOJ earlier, but people in the DOJ have recently been leaning towards one political party over the other. Now, again, nothing I say or do has any bearing on what the beliefs of the DoD or the Department of the Navy stand for. However, in my capacity as a civilian, I'm allowed to talk about certain topics, which I wouldn't be able to do while I'm actually in uniform. So, while I'm here as a civilian, I'll give my personal opinion. Now, something that is very difficult for a lot of people is to keep calm and relatively sane when it comes to talking about politics. When you focus so much of your energy on politics, you can cause, well, it can be a very frustrating thing because from your perspective, everything that you believe and everything that you want to happen or what who you vote for is just the most natural logical thing in the world, and anyone who goes against that must be absolutely insane. Now, I have criticized the left and the Democrats heavily in the past. Now, it's not to say that I actually like the Republicans. There's a bunch about the Republicans I don't like. It just so happens that I really like Trump, and Trump has been really good for the country. Now, there's a lot of people who see it very differently. It is a long, long topic to talk about, but Donald Trump came into the political scene a long, long time ago. People wanted him to run for office. Both people in the Democrat Party and in the Republican Party wanted him to run. They both wanted him to run on their side of the aisle. Now, Donald Trump started off as a Republican, if you believe the information that's on Wikipedia. And then he eventually switched over to the Independent Party of New York, which in New York, a candidate can be endorsed by more than one party. So, for example, the Republican candidate is usually endorsed by both the Republican Party and the Conservative Party of New York. And the Democrat Party is endorsed by the Democrat Party, obviously, and usually, I want to say the Working Families Party, which is a socialist party. Now, it's not that they actually believe that the Democrats are all socialists. It's just that they believe that the Democrat Party is more left leaning and therefore closer to socialism than the Republican Party is. And then, obviously, you have the Libertarian Party and the Independent Party of New York. The Independent Party of New York, obviously, was formed from both breakoffs from the Democrat Party and the Republican Party of New York. And the Conservative Party of New York came from the Republicans. Now, the Independent Party in New York recently lost its electoral power inside of New York because, well, supposedly they didn't have enough people registered for the party anymore, which I kind of doubt that's the real reason, but I mean, I haven't looked into it that much. Let's just say it with that, huh? Now, for the actual parties. The reason why I bring this up is that Donald Trump has never been. Oh, how do I say this? He has never been married to one party. He started off as a Republican and then switched to the Independent Party in New York. Then he switched to the Democrat Party. And then he switched to the Reform Party, which was, I think it was Ross Perot's party. And the Reform Party is still around, and he ran for reform for president in 2020, I believe, or 2024. I always forget which one it was. It wasn't a serious run, but it was kind of like his test run, just to like feel it out. He knew he couldn't win with the Reform Party. The Reform Party had already basically collapsed, and it had become kind of like a meme party at that point. Basically, anyone of any alternate political belief, from anarchism to like socialism to like nationalist party. I'm not talking about like outright like neo-Germans, neo like mid-century Germans or anything like that. It's just anyone who had a political opinion that was not Democrat or Republican basically joined it. So it just became like this big tent party, and it just, there was no actual unity after Ross Perot had lost his 2 races. So again, it was just him kind of just testing out the waters. And then he rejoined the Republican Party. Now you'll hear people say that Trump is an old New York Democrat or an old like classical liberal. Again, that's not really the case. He started as a Republican. But of course, that would be something that the Democrats also would push. The Democrats would never admit that Trump had once been one of them. Despite the fact that when Trump had been just a businessman, everyone loved the guy. Everyone wanted to be his friend. Everyone wanted him to endorse them and to get funding for their campaigns from him. In fact, he funded several Democrats in California, as well as many other places. So when he eventually ran for office as a Republican, and well, Trump has never been very good at keeping his mouth shut, and he is very, very vocal about his hatred of certain individuals. And I'm talking not about race, I'm not talking about sex or gender or anything like that. I'm talking about people that he feels do not respect him. He has always criticized people who he believes that are not trustworthy, who are not polite, who do not have good intelligence, who are bad at business, who don't know how to play fair, I guess. Now, if you don't know, he was actually awarded alongside Rosa Parks back in the day. No one had ever accused Trump of being racist. The only time that there was ever any issues was back in, I believe, the 70s when his father was still alive. And his apartment businesses were sued because they weren't allowing in enough minorities. Now, I'm not going to get into the fact that a lot of minorities didn't have enough money to afford the apartments in the first place. But again, this was something that people were, well, let's just say race grifting had started to become an issue, and it has only gotten worse since the 70s. Like, it wasn't really a civil rights thing. It's eventually just spiraled out of control. But again, it's something that Democrats like to bring up all the time when it really wasn't as big of a deal as they make it out to be. Trump has always been okay with everyone, as long as they're nice to him, as long as they're fair to him. He's got that Brooklyn rage in him, despite the fact, he's not actually from Brooklyn. But anyways, that is one problem with Trump, is that he gets very angry very quickly. Now, when you need a pit bull, or when you need somebody who is not afraid to stand up for himself and choose someone out in public, that's very, very good, especially when it comes to negotiation. But Democrats, are still butthurt that he left their party and no longer funds them and joined their opponents that, well, they'll smear him every way to Sunday. And it has driven a lot of people absolutely insane. Now, when rage is directed against people, they often get very angry back. Now, the left, being the party of the mentally ill, and I'm not just saying that, I'm not saying that everyone on the left is mentally ill, but it turns out, based on studies, that women that are on the Democrat side are like 4 times more likely to self-diagnose themselves with a mental illness. Usually like anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, or like transgender issues, stuff like that. It's just the way it turns out. When you have this kind of rage, you have minorities who were brought down by what is called the Great Society. Now, going into a whole backstory on where this rage came from. Back when JFK met his end, Lyndon B. Johnson took office. Now, Lyndon B. Johnson, like many other Democrats before him, did not have a very favorable view of black people. But he decided, and this is a little bit more than speculation, we know this probably happened as the rumors state, that if he was going to have to accept the black vote, he said that those, and he used the N-word, will be voting Democrat for the next 100 years. Now, he then formed the Great Society. The Great Society was a very subversive program. Now, before the program started, marriage amongst the black population was around 95% when it came to having children. It might even have been higher than that. Now, what the Great Society did, the idea behind it was, if you are a single mother, that you will be given government benefits and your children would be taken care of. Now, this seems like a good idea, and it would be. However, it gave this very perverse incentive, is if the father was not in the life of the child, and he was, say in jail, or he had been unable to pay for child support, the government would basically be the one paying for child support. It gave this incentive that black people didn't have to get married. And it was specifically targeted toward black families. And since now mothers didn't have to stay with the father of their children, they were told that they can now be independent and they could work on their own, be strong, independent women who don't need no man. And then there was an endemic of single mothers. Then these single mothers would raise their children. And then without a strong male figure in the family, male boys often would start to act out, and they would join gangs, or they would not have a firm hand to prevent them from committing crimes. Then they would end up in jail. Then they would come out, knock up some woman, then end up back in prison, leaving single mothers to be taken care of by the government. And then it spiraled out of control until single motherhood amongst the black population is now the norm. What the Great Society did is it destroyed an entire race of people. Now, I know many black families that actually have both the mother and the father in the home, and the children are raised properly, and they haven't joined any gangs or committed any crimes or anything like that. You will have rappers who have led wonderful lives, relatively rich, having both a father and a mother, who will glorify gang violence, glorify being a thug, basically encouraging people to become criminals, despite the fact that the rapper himself has never done anything like that, besides maybe just snorting some coke or something like that. Well, you can't blame the free market for that, but it is. These kinds of rap has been very popular in the black community. And since there's a lot of people out there that didn't have their fathers in the home, it just spiraled out of control, like I said. And since the government is basically the baby daddy of all these single mothers, they are encouraged, or they have another perverse incentive to vote for Democrats. Basically meaning that Lyndon B. Johnson got everything that he wanted, which is a bad thing. Now, when you have people trying to take away these benefits to encourage fathers and mothers to get married and form a family, trying to punish the few in order to help the many, to bring encouragement to start having nuclear families again, having a responsible father in the house, raising the kids alongside a responsible mother. Because keep in mind, mothers nowadays have to work. They can't be in the house all day, and they don't always have a very firm hand when it comes to discipline. I'm not saying they need to be smacking their kids around, but there's a certain flavor of encouragement, and that, again, not violence. I'm talking about the way men talk to their children, generally, is different than how mothers talk to their children. And you need a little bit of both in order to actually have a healthy, mentally stable child. When you try to take away these benefits, you can cause rage. Then you have the race grifting, where a lot of people try to make white people feel responsible for all the crimes that have been committed against minorities throughout the ages. Now, white people have also been mistreated in many countries around the world, including in many white countries. After all, in Europe, they have always been very divided. You would have the British commit atrocities against the French. You would have the Germans commit atrocities against the, Slavic people. You would have the Norwegians commit atrocities against all sorts of people, from the Rus all the way to the Anglo-Saxons. And then you'll have the North Africans, who had descended from both Mideastern people and from people who migrated up through the Sahara Desert and formed a Mediterranean population, and from the Greeks. They eventually formed the Barbary pirates. They were the last ones to continue slavery until it was eventually stopped by the British. Now, originally, the United States took on these Barbary pirates because they were capturing American sailors. And that's actually where our NCO sword came from, I believe. Yeah, I believe it was the NCO sword. We got it from the Barbary Wars. And then when people realized that the Barbary pirates were way weaker than anyone figured, that's when the British and the rest of the Europe came in and basically ended the slave trade once and for all. And the slave trade in North Africa was actually worse than it was in America, because what they would do is they would actually gild the men, which, if you don't know, that means cut off their genitalia, because they didn't want the men to reproduce, because if they reproduced, you had a steady supply of slaves being produced by those men. They wanted to make sure that people were always coming back to buy more slaves, and that the slave population couldn't self-sustain itself. If that sounds disgusting, yes. Yes, it is. Very much so. But despite the fact that these North Africans have been considered, people want to rewrite history and say these North Africans were all black, whereas they were actually a mixture of black, Middle Eastern, and Greek, as well as other Europeans, like the Italians. I mean, God's sakes, that whole thing with Cleopatra being black, her entire family was Greek. They did not interbreed with the local population. And the local population wasn't black either. They were Middle Eastern. Anyways, off topic. With all this race grifting and having the single mothers and having men who were not raised by their fathers, you can get a lot of frustration and anger, especially when people want to end government benefits, or at least downsize them to save money and also to encourage families sticking together. Then you have all these people saying that everything is the fault of white people. Now, for my family was actually has been here for hundreds upon hundreds of years. In fact, one of my ancestors, a man named Charles, is recorded as having fought for the Union as a Northern Democrat. If slavery is the fault of all white people, because at some point or another their families owned slaves, then my family should be credited as freeing the slaves, since my family actually fought. We fought to free the slaves. But it never seems to work out like that. Because when you say, if I were to say to somebody that I do not owe reparations to anybody because my ancestor freed your ancestor, they'll tell me that you can't take credit for your ancestors' achievements. But they will say that I need to take responsibility for my ancestors' sins. This kind of race grifting and always trying to get money out of people because of the color of their skin is a very, very racist ideology. And it's basically them trying to guilt trip you into giving them money. It is very frustrating that after all this time, after everything that our society has done to try to make this country a better place for everybody, that this race politics keeps on going. Now, I mentioned this before, but BLM actually formed under Obama. It is very common within the black community for black people to say that Obama hadn't done jack shit for black people. This is a very common belief, and he really hadn't. In fact, race relations actually got way worse under Obama. And now he's actually pushing more division amongst the races, making sure that black culture is different than white culture. Really trying to hammer home that we are different when we are actually very much alike. Again, very frustrating thing. But this breeds a certain amount of anger. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was not a socialist at first. He believed that everyone should that black people should get their freedoms, their rights, and be able to not fear for their lives. That they can go vote, that they can get a proper education, that they can get proper health care, that they don't have to worry about the police beating them down or people coming after them because of the color of their skin. He wanted people to be judged by their character. And Malcolm X, on the other hand, started out as a socialist. Socialist indoctrination has been a problem for a long time. They basically promise that, hey, we will help you. We will take money away from your oppressors and give it to you. We will make everyone truly equal, and we will make sure that society respects you. However, this is not what socialism's actual goal is. Socialism's actual goal is to cause division and hatred in order to bring about a revolution, a violent revolution, and this revolution will overthrow the government, allowing somebody to take charge of the government in order to bring about their socialist paradise. The socialist paradise, however, the government is a very inefficient body. It will always go for the lowest bidder or try to go cut corners wherever possible because it wants to be able to cheaply supply everything you need to survive. However, if you do not agree with this government, you are an enemy of the state. Therefore, you must be eliminated. You are a detriment. You are trying to stop the revolution. You are trying to stop equality. Therefore, you are less equal than everybody else, and therefore you must be removed. Somebody in a socialist society will always take power, and they will always become drunk on the power because they will be the judge, jury, and the executioner. They can say to their government, to their police force, I need you to take this guy out. Now, the funny mustache man from the mid-century Germans and the funny hat man from the mid-century Italians were socialist. Their ideologies were based on socialism. They started out, in fact, they started out as socialists. They worked with socialists. They wrote articles as socialists. And they based their entire belief system on socialism. The government that they formed, which starts with an F and ends with an ism, just like all the other isms, believes in all within the state. What was it? All within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. Basically. Meaning that people were allowed their freedoms, sorta, as long as they were efficient enough and went along with the government line. If they were ever stepped out of line, they would be taken over by the government for the good of all the people. Now, the Italian man's ideology did not seemingly have a race component to it, whereas the funny mustache man did have a racial component to it. But In a socialist society, there is always the outgroup that is trying to stop the revolution and stop progress, whether or not that group actually means to. And that group will always be hated and always be eliminated. And when there's no enemies of the state will make new enemies. So that people are always mad at something other than the government, which is inefficient. Malcolm X eventually realized that socialism was not the way to go. And it just so happens that he ended up not alive not long after that. Martin Luther King Jr. started to think, maybe we should have some socialist policies. But he wasn't really too keen on it. He was thinking it over. He was starting to wonder, maybe this is something we should explore, but he never got there. And especially since, Malcolm X had been in communication with him, he could have kind of have told him, this is not the way we should be going, but, Malcolm X didn't live long enough, and Martin Luther King, well, let's just say the Democrats didn't want him around for much longer. Democrats have always been the party of racism. Now, I was going to say different strokes for different folks, but that is not appropriate and not what I was trying to say. There has been controversy with the Republicans as well. For example, the Republicans, Lincoln, wanted there to be a society in which everyone was united behind a single culture. Slaves, however, had developed their own culture. And he believed that it would be very difficult to integrate them into American society. So he came up with an idea to send many former slaves, freedmen, and many black people who had never been slaves, free men, to Africa. And they were sent to a place that became known as Liberia. Now, their cities were built, a major city was built. These freed men and the free men, again, freed men were former slaves, and free men were people who weren't slaves, were sent there. And there was a white governor put in charge. Much money was put into the project. A fully functional city was created, and eventually control of the city was given to the African Americans who had been returned to Africa. Now, these African Americans did not have a high view of the locals in the area, because many of these people were educated, being, free men, and everyone else, education it really depends on whether or not slaves were educated, based on whether or not they needed it, or whether or not, like, the master decided that their slave should be educated. But given that they were now free, and the free men often were educated people, they would educate, like, the former slaves. And their culture was completely different from any Africans who hadn't gone through this kind of 100-year process of becoming Americans. So as soon as they were given control of the Liberia, it wasn't long until they were enslaving the locals in the nearby area, because these were backward, to the opinion of the Liberians, these were backwards, like, loincloth wearing barbarians, basically, that didn't deserve rights because they were uneducated and savage. I mean, the irony of the whole thing should not be lost on you, is what I'm saying. Anyways, you could see the divisions between the races all the way back then, as Lincoln didn't believe that black culture and white culture were compatible. And everything since then has really reinforced the separation between the cultures. Now, there's been intermixing, obviously, and it is possible for people to have both cultures or be able to integrate with each other just fine. But that's not what modern Democrats want. They want the division. They want everyone in their own little box, in their own little, like, compartmentalized organization. And then all these organizations are brought together to make a bigger whole. Diversity is their strength, they say. Now, when they elect their representatives are then viciously controlled via either blackmail or threats by saying that, hey, if you don't do what we tell you to do, we're going to fund your opponent, you're going to lose your position, no one will ever care about you, no one will ever vote you back in, we will smear you, we will destroy your life, and we will absolutely make everything you do a living hell for the rest of eternity. So you better vote the way we tell you to vote. Which is why you often see Democrats all voting one way, even when people in the party have previously decried and criticized the policies that are currently being pushed. Politicians are very corrupt like this, but when it comes to the common people, when you throw all these very different cultures together and different ideologies together, there starts to be very strong purity tests. And this brings us back to the anger portion of what I was talking about. I had to explain the background to get to this. I'm saying the Democrats want this anger because then they can direct that anger at their political opponents. They can hold up these angry protesters and say that, hey, what you are doing is causing strife and hatred, and it's causing these people to rise up to cause issues. Clearly, you need to stop what you're doing, or else. Basically, it's a threat in all but name, and they try to use this to bludgeon anybody who disagrees with them to doing what they want to do. This has backfired majorly because it has destroyed many Democrat cities throughout the country. But they don't care as long as the Democrats have the power and the money that they want. And again, I'm just talking about the corrupt ones, and the ones who aren't corrupt are being blackmailed or they are being, threatened with losing their positions of power. A lot of these people justify it to themselves by saying that they can only reform the party from within, but when the party is rotten to the core, and I'm not just saying this about the Democrats, this also happens within the Republicans. Looking at you, McConnell. McConnell also threatens people with, like, if you don't do what I tell you to do, McConnell will come and take away all your funding by talking to the super PACs that fund your campaign, and they will fund your political opponent and make sure that you lose your next primaries. And not to get too fine of a point in it, this is where the uniparty comes in, but again, we're not going there right now. Again, Democrats want this anger. They want people to be afraid. They also want people to look at this and say, these are freedom fighters. These are people who are rising up because they want something and they're not getting it. Therefore, we need to give them what they want. They use this as a threat, basically. Or they never condemn it. They encourage it, in fact. And they actually applaud, like recently Tim Walsh was applauding Tesla stock going down. Why did Tesla stock going down? Because homegrown Yorkshire Terriers were destroying Tesla vehicles, and investors were getting frightened that people would stop buying Teslas because if people bought Teslas, they would get attacked in public. and their cars would be burned down, and not everybody can get the good insurance. I mean, if you're buying a Tesla, you should have enough money to get insurance, but I mean, some insurances kind of don't like the idea of paying for, Molotov cocktails being thrown through your window. It's not really considered an accident at that point. You know what I mean? I mean, insurance companies are their own problem, but again, besides the point. When you talk about politics, when you get involved about politics, when you have to deal with the anger of the left or the anger of the right, you have to deal with, it usually comes from the left, when your friends and family cut you off because they don't like your political beliefs and they have been propagandized to believe that you're an evil person for not wanting people to throw Molotov cocktails at your businesses. Again, the left is often mentally ill. Not always, but they have a higher percentage of mentally ill people in their party. So they think that, if you don't you stand 100% behind their beliefs, that you're an enemy, and therefore you don't deserve to be considered human, and that you should be cut off and ignored. Because they are very angry, and they don't want to deal with negative vibes. When you have to go through all of that, you can get very angry yourself. Now, the Bible specifically teaches that to turn the other cheek, to always be understanding and caring. But at the same time, you cannot be understanding and caring to somebody who never wants to change. Jesus has cast out people who are evil, who will go to hell because they do not want to change. They do not want to follow him. They do not respect kindness being shown to them, and they will never reciprocate the kindness. That these people, it's like he said, the people on the right have treated each other as I would want them to treat me. Whereas the people on the left, and I'm not talking about left or right politics right now, this is literally what he said. You had like a group on the right, on his right, and a group on his left. And the group on the right were the type of people who took care of the sick, who took care of the poor, who took care of the elderly, who took care of the young. And he basically taught that they should treat everybody as if they were family, or as if they were Jesus himself. What you have done for the least of me, you have done for me. And then the people on his left were the people who had kicked mud on the sick, who had ignored the poor, who had let the elderly suffer, who had let the children starve. He basically told them that they would fall into the eternal pit. When we say turn the other cheek, we are talking about showing kindness to the unkind in order to try to teach them to be kind. But you still have to be able to defend yourself, or be able to recognize that these types of people aren't always savable. You cannot save everybody. And I have tried to save many, many people from themselves, but you cannot convince somebody, you cannot force somebody to be a good person. It's just not possible. And sometimes if someone threatens you, you have to be able to take care of it. However, humans are emotional creatures. If somebody spits on us, if somebody yells at us, if somebody decries us as evil simply because we want lower taxes and not have to pay for families to be broken apart as I said, like the whole Great Society thing, we wanted to stop that. We want families to actually, mothers and fathers to get married and take care of their families and form healthy social relationships with their children, and to not be criminals, to actually have a stable society. So we want to take away some of the benefits that encourage these people to not have families, to not live with their children, to not take care of their offspring, to not marry their baby mamas, to have sex outside of marriage and not use a condom, for example. When you try to take away these programs, you can make people very angry, and they can attack you. And then you get angry, and then violence suddenly spirals out of control. You have to be able to control that anger. When I'm by myself and I'm listening to like political videos and I hear like some really stupid takes or some really nasty opinions, it can make me angry. And I can say some pretty inflammatory things. However, this kind of stuff is just, it's not something I actually believe. It's not stuff that I actually support. Like, I might say to myself, like, oh, you believe that? Well, maybe you should be thrown in jail forever. I don't actually believe that. That is not something that I want. I want a society where we can actually come together and understand each other. But I'm also aware that the anger that I feel is both validating, like, it's a natural feeling that I get from frustration from everything that's going on, but at the same time, while I know this anger is valid, that it is also something I need to recognize as a bad thing and something that needs to be taken care of. I joke about these things. I use dark humor to cope. But you should not act on these feelings to do something that, you would regret. There are people out there who are being arrested because they are destroying the only source of transportation that people can get to work with. They are destroying the economy by making it businesses impossible to operate. They are allowing people to steal from businesses until the businesses themselves have to close, causing food deserts, causing pharmacies to not be able to survive. That shopping marts or the local corner store cannot survive. The local gas station has to close down because it's too dangerous to operate. This stuff is happening in every major city throughout the country, and it has caused anger and frustration. That anger and frustration is not taken out on the criminals because these criminals are often related to, by blood, to the people who are being affected. Or they blame the crime on poverty. Well, you can't arrest poverty. You have to arrest the people actually committing the crimes, because crime actually leads to poverty. Because when there's no businesses for you to work at, or the businesses have to spend an extra $10,000 on security and they can't afford to pay you a living wage because they are making so little profits from all the theft, the crimes are leading to poverty. Poverty does not lead to crimes. You have to remember that. But they don't always understand that, and, well, anger is not irrational emotion. They'll take that anger out on anything that they perceive as having caused their issues. And with the Democrat Party often blaming white people for all of society's ills instead of the fact that they are making crime legal, basically. Well, this anger is very useful to them because they don't want that anger directed at them. They want it directed at their political opponents so that their political opponents are weakened. You cannot return that anger in force. You have to be able to control yourself. You have to have a controlled aggression when defending yourself. You have to know how to defend yourself without breaking the law. and so on and so on and so on. We have to have self-control. Anyways, that's all I wanted to talk about, guys. That's it for now. Have some self-control and realize that maybe your frustrations and anger, while valid, may not lead you to a good decision. That you still have to be kind to people, even when they're not kind to you. And that what's going on right now should make society better. What Trump is doing should make society better. It will be a little bit more difficult in the short term, but focus on the positive. Listen to some music. Listen to something that will make you happy. And not to say to ignore your problems or ignore the chaos around you, but try to keep yourself calm, happy, and then try to improve on society in your own little way. Don't do anything rash or crazy. As long as the hatred does not spread, we can make the world a better place. Have self-control. Anyways, that's it for now, guys. Goodbye.